Hi, my name is Jeff C., and I'm the software architect at Tina.io, and today we're going to take this Next.js website and learn how to power it with Tina. So Tina is a Git-backed CMS. It takes content from Markdown or JSON files in your repo and powers them with a GraphQL API. To get started, it's completely local. You can just run everything right here on your local machine, and we're going to wire up Tina to basically pull content that we see on the page here from Markdown files. So this content so far is just in our components. We've got a page component here, got a header and a hero. Inside the hero, you can see we've just got some hard-coded content. So the goal of this series is to show you how to basically bring your UI to life with Tina, make it editable, and then even actually make it live editable, so your editors can click on elements on the page and edit them right there in context. So with that being said, let's get started. The first thing to do is actually add Tina. So we've got a couple packages here, TinaCMS, and then we've got the TinaCMS CLI. Both of those packages are going to kind of work together to basically build you the CMS and take care of handling, the content, and so you can fetch data and all that stuff. I've already installed it, but go ahead and get that installed. This repo will be available on GitHub, so you can kind of step through it and follow along, or kind of jump in at any point. In order to work with Tina, we need a Tina folder. So let's just get that started. Tina config.ts. This file is basically going to be the main entry point into Tina. And so we have a configuration that we can define config, and that's going to be the default export. Export default, define config. All right, so there's a few things that we need for this configuration. First is going to be the branch. This is not something we need right now. It's something that we'll need when we go to deploy, and that's going to be the same for the client ID and the token. We can ignore those for now. The thing we do need right now is the build information. So the way Tina works is that it bundles up a single page app, and then it loads it onto your framework's website, so you can sort of move it with your application. So the public folder is going to basically depend on what framework you're using. In this scenario, we've got Next.js running. So Next has the public directory for the static assets, and that's exactly what Tina is. And within there, we're going to put it in the admin folder. One other thing we need, and this is kind of the main thing for the configuration, is the schema. The schema is going to have some collections, and the collection is basically a way of saying any file in this given folder is going to be a content file. So we'll make a collection called page, and that's just going to be our sort of generic page collection, and that'll be called page. The path here is just going to be the path to the folder that we want to use. So pages, and then the format is going to be Markdown. We're going to give it some fields. And one of the fields, let's just start with title. Name, title, and the type here is just going to be string. So this is actually all you need to run Tina to get it started and to sort of see it in action. When we installed the CMS and the CMS CLI, we got a command, TinaCMS, and you can see there's a few things you can do with that. We're going to run the dev command right away. So npx TinaCMS dev. And that's just going to start the dev server for Tina, not the dev server for your framework. So you'll notice it prints out some information. It's going to bundle a single page app at the specified directory. And so that's going to be in the admin. And you can see in here, there's an index file. And that's just going to load up some JavaScript. The other thing that it did is it generated a lock file and a generated folder. One thing that we're going to want to do is ignore that. If you use the init command with Tina, you won't have to do this. It comes out of the box. But the generated folder is something that we don't really need to worry about. It just kind of pops up whenever we run the CLI. So the thing about this is that Tina doesn't actually host your single page app. It's hosted on your framework. So in order to run Tina and to view it, we should make it part of we should make sure our dev server for our framework is running. So with that being said, let's just change our dev command, which is next dev. What we're going to do instead is TinaCMS dev, and then we're going to give it a subcommand of next dev. and that's just going to start the TinaCMS dev server and then start the Next dev server as sort of a sub process. So from there, we can just do npm run dev. And one thing about this is it's accessible at admin index.html, which can get a little bit annoying. So let's just make sure it's working here. And all right, we've got Tina running. As I said, it's running in this HTML file, single page app. Just quickly, one of the things that you can do to make it a little bit cleaner, especially with Next, is we can set up a rewrite, which I've sort of cheated and commented out here. So in our Next config, we've got this rewrites property, and we can basically say, hey, we want to serve these HTML files just at admin, just for conciseness. So do that. Let's rerun this command now. That way we don't have to go to admin all the time, or the index.html file all the time. We can just go here. Okay, so all set up. Tina's running. We've got a page collection here. There's no content in it. As you can see, it's running on the same port as our website, just under the admin directory. So let's go ahead and just add our one and only page, and let's just call it hello. This is going to be the home.md file. Hit save, and the file name here has been created, and we've got our front matter for the Markdown file, hello. So this basically took our configuration for our collection and wired it up with the appropriate fields, gave us the opportunity to save them. So with that being said, our content's here. Let's figure out how to fetch that information. If you've worked with Markdown in your application, one thing you might do is do sort of like an fs read file, read the Markdown, bring in remark, parse it out, render it, and all that stuff. With Tina, you don't do any of that because Tina is a CMS. It treats your content like it would treat content in a database. So you basically just fetch your content like you would from any sort of content server. With that being said, we can get our data with the generated client. Tina comes out of the box when you run the CMS dev command. The generated folder that I was speaking about will create a client file for you, and that client file knows about your schema. So it can auto-generate queries that are what you're going to probably want to query anyway. In this scenario, I have a page collection. So if I had a post collection, then I'd have a post function here. In the page collection, relative path, home.md, that was the file I just created. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass it in here. One of the things about the shape of this data, you can kind of hover over it and see, is we've got not only do we have the data, but we have the variables and the query. And we'll talk about why we structured it that way in the future. But basically, that's going to allow us to sort of know about what fields are on your page and how they got there, which is super important for visual editing that we'll get to in the future. So I'm going to take that and copy it in here. Page query was something that came from the generated types. So you can usually pretty much figure out, kind of where the data is coming from and how it's been generated. You can kind of step through it and get the appropriate type for it from the generated fields. So with that being said, I've got data running through here, got my props, and then I've got my site. This is not super useful right now because the data is not powering our components, but we can see if we render out the title, just do a quick little test here. Hello. Okay, good. Got things running. That's a good sign. So in order to power our blocks here, we can update our content model for the page directory, and we'll do that now. And that way we can sort of start wiring things up so they actually work. Okay, let me just get rid of that. So we have this title field here, not very useful. Let's go ahead and add a new one. This is going to be a blocks. We're going to call this blocks and blocks. And this is going to be an object type. And not only an object type, but it's going to be a list. So there's going to be a list of objects. And in a list of objects, you can either have them all be the same shape, in which case you would provide fields. But for this case, we're going to have a few differently shaped objects. It's going to have this block, and this block. So we'll wire that up with different templates. And this first one, let's call welcome hero, and the label. And again, we got fields. So first field, looking at our page here, we've got this sort of structured content here. Let's call this a message, and it's going to be a rich text type. All right. Next thing is going to be these links. Let's make this a list of objects again. This time we're going to have fields inside them. So message, the next one is going to be name links. Type object. And list true again. This time we're going to specify fields, and we're going to have a string for the link and another string for the label. Okay, and let's do one more. We're going to have a string for the style. We have a couple different styles. One's a button, one's sort of like a ghost button. So for this one, we don't want this to be open to be, any value at all. We want it to be specific to a limited type, number of strings. You can either do a simple style or button style. And so those are going to be options. And once we do that, we'll see as an editor coming in here, you click on a new block, welcome hero. That's our only option for now. Let's copy this content over and make that bold. We'll style this up specifically so that it has this gradient style with a bold mark, and I'll show you how to do that. Next thing is we got these links. The first link was, let's say, homepage, get started, and that was the button style. Next one was learn more, learn, and that was simple style. Okay, these are actually reversed. The later one goes first usually. Obviously, this is kind of a problem. You can't really tell what field is what. You can't see what the items here are. We'll go through how to improve that in a future video. But needless to say, that's something that needs to be addressed. But we've hit save, and now we can go back to our page and we can start to actually power it with real content. So going back into this component, we've got our welcome hero, and that's all hard-coded content, but we've already got our props figured out here. Data, page, blocks. Okay, so we're stepping through our blocks in our page collection, and that's what you can see reflected in this shape of content. In this scenario, we've got a block. It's going to have a type name, and it's going to be block page blocks welcome here, and that's going to map to the collection object that we just defined. So let's do a switch case for this, and we're going to switch on the type name. There's only one option, and so we're just going to go ahead and return the welcome hero for that. For now, the page looks the exact same. It's not using the data, and in fact, when we're done, it's going to look the exact same, but it's going to be powered with actual content. So we're going to pass this block through to the welcome hero, and the welcome hero doesn't have any props right now because it's hard-coded, but we can do page blocks welcome hero. Notice how I just kind of auto-completed that, and the generated types came through and found what it was. Usually pretty close to the shape of the type that we're dealing with. And now we've got actual props in here, so we can actually bring it to life. The first thing that we're going to run into is if we look at our props, we've got a message, and that was a rich text message type. So if we were to just render this out, that's an object, and it's rich text, it's structured. So we've got maybe a header in there, and we've got this bold mark, and we've got this paragraph tag. Those are all elements within the rich text object. And that's a pretty big pain to render out on your own. So Tina comes with something called the Tina Markdown component. And if you've ever used something like React Markdown, this is the same type of deal. We don't really actually parse the Markdown here. This has been parsed from the GraphQL API. So as it came down, it was already in the sort of structured shape that we need. And it comes from the rich text module. So when we render this out, we can see it here. This is the content we just added. It's completely unstyled though. So with Tina Markdown, we can basically go through and more or less style things based on how it's being rendered. So we'll just take styles from our actual rendered element, and we'll just pass the props in. So that's the H1, and then I think we had a bold props, and we'll grab this one. So our bold elements. Okay, and then I think we just had a paragraph as well. That's just going to be P. And that's going to map to this element. This is a little more space here. Okay, so we've basically just gone through and copied our component logic into Tina Markdown. So now Tina's going to step through and it's going to style it accordingly. Looks like maybe I didn't get, I don't know if I hit save on that. Okay, so we've got everything working, looking exactly the same. Just sort of a sanity check here. Do we actually do anything? Yes. Okay, so this content now coming from CMS. So with that being said, we've basically taken this hard-coded component and we wired it up with Tina. We were type safe, we knew exactly what shape to expect, and we stepped through it. Oh, sorry, I think that's all I need to do with those. Let's just test the links. Get started, exclamation point. Yes, okay. So previously those links were being powered by a local variable, and this is no longer needed. So this thing has kind of come to life. One thing that's probably pretty obvious, and anytime you've ever worked with content, with a content management system, is this back and forth. Clicking here, checking it, making sure it's changed. And this only gets to be more and more complicated as your site grows. I mean, we've got one block and we're deeply nested in it, making, changes to this get started. How would you possibly find that? That's something that is always really difficult with editing content. So with Tina, visual editing and being able to edit in context is really important. And that's something that you can do pretty quickly out of the box. So one of the things I did earlier was I moved this page component out of the app directory. Just as a quick aside, right now with React and the app directory, at least the way it's sort of been designed, using state requires a use client directive at the top of the file. There are some different ways that you could get around this if you wanted to make your page editable, but not, have to bail out and use a client component. You could sort of compose this in a few different ways, and we've got some examples of how to do that. But with that being said, we're going to actually use state, and we've got a hook from Tina, which is called the use Tina hook, and this is going to basically take your data and make it live, and it looks like this. So we fetched our data from our query. As I said, we kind of had this data shape. This is the thing we care about. We had variables. That's going to be relative path here. And then we had the query itself. Tina uses that information to then go ahead and figure out what forms to create for you in the visual in the visual mode that you're in. So this hook, when you're in production, doesn't do anything. It just passes the data straight through. But when you're in an editing state, which we'll show in a second, this data sort of comes to life. So in order to wire that up, we need to tell Tina where to find the home.md file. So when you're in your configuration, when you're in the CMS and you're looking at this page, you need to know, well, okay, this home page, how can I find this on my website? As an editor, that's one of the big challenges with non-visual editing. So as a developer, you can configure that, and that makes editors' lives a lot easier. So we've got this router property, and that's got some information to help you basically as a developer decide where this, show where this page can be edited visually. In this scenario, it can be edited visually at the home page, and that's just going to be a string. So whatever you return here is going to be the route for the given page. So when we're on this page here and we click this file, we need to know where to take the editor. In this scenario, we're going to take them to the home page within the TinaCMS iframe, which I'll show in a second. But in a lot of scenarios, you're going to want to take them to something more specific, and you've got some information about that. So if we had a home page and an about page, we might say, if props document sys relative path equals home.md, let's go here. But then you might also say otherwise, go to their file name, which is just the version of the relative path without the MD. So if we had a page about.md, this would just take you to about, for example. In our scenario, we don't have that. Most of our collections are going to, most of the time you're going to have something there. Not every collection routes to a URL though. You might have a collection for authors, but you don't have an author page. That's okay. That's not something you need to do for everything, but sort of for your bread and butter pieces of content, this is, making a visual, this is something you're going to want to do. So with that being said, once we've got this router wired up, the next time we go to edit the home page, we click it and we're actually taken into the home page. So here we can see we actually figured out what the right form was to show here. This is the same form we were editing earlier, but because of that use Tina hook, which had access to the query, we piped that through the iframe, which is here. Your website's in an iframe, and we wired it up so that it can be visual. So now when you make changes to the form, that's going to go back through that use Tina hook and update your page. So we could say eat your tots, and that's going to update on your page, and that's just the way Tina's wired up. This is visual editing, and as you can see, quite a bit easier. As an editor, you go to the page you want to change, things pop up right there for you. To take things a little bit further, there's another hook, or there's another utility that we can use. This is called the Tina Field utility, and actually we don't want it right here. We're going to go into the Welcome Hero and grab it. This Tina Field utility basically has this way of saying, well, we've got our content rendered onto our page. These are the components we have full control over. It's just React. There's nothing crazy going on in here. We're not inverting control over to the CMS, which is doing all sorts of crazy things. These are just, our components for the most part. Here you've got the Tina Markdown component. But with this, we've made it easy so that you can basically say, all right, well, I want to tell my Tina form where exactly each field is on the page, similar to how the router is saying, this is where the document is on the site. Well, within that page, this is where the field is on that page. So the way this Tina Field helper works is we got this data Tina Field attribute, and we just give it the information. So the props carries metadata on and down through the object that Tina has. Again, from the use Tina hook that we added all sorts of metadata to that object. And so this Tina Field is going to pop that information off of each object, and it's going to allow you to basically say, well, I want this div here to link to the message property on my collection. You could choose whatever you want, but this is where I'm rendering the links. And so hit save. And when I do that, you can see that there's this box that pops up over that element. When you're not editing, when you don't have the sidebar open, that doesn't happen. So we're going to go through and sort of bring that data Tina field property into our components. And as we're building out the site, we're just going to do that as sort of part of our building process. And it'll make everything editable, so your editors can just click on elements and edit them. So with that being said, we've got a couple more here. We've got 2 link components. And instead of props here, it's just going to be whatever sort of the last kind of the furthest down object is in your, in your data fetching. So this link property is going to have a label and a URL and other stuff. We can pretty much put whatever we want here. Label probably makes sense as an editor. You're probably most of the time going to want to click through and edit the label. Okay, so for both of those are wired up. You can see clickable. And that's pretty easy. Doesn't really do anything to your components. Doesn't really get in the way of your production, development concerns. But basically, this just attaches some CSS properties to those data attributes and listens for some clicks and wires it up that way. So as I said, we're going to kind of go through the rest of these blocks and we're going to wire them up similar to how we just did it, taking the same principles and just applying them to different shapes, and we'll kind of go through some different scenarios through as we go. Thanks.